We're going to spend a good couple of hours together. So, before we get started, is it okay if I can share a little bit by myself? So at least you can know who you're dealing with. Probably Daryl's told you a bit about me already. But it's all right. Thumbs up, no. Thumbs up, cool. So thank you for that. So basically, you obviously know my name, Richard Answer. I am a managing director of a company called Once Wills and Trusts Limited. So Once stands for Own Nothing, Control Everything. Important statement there, especially on this whole workshop, building generational wealth the right way. So you might want to write that down: own nothing, control everything. The secret to wealth, in fact, is to own nothing and control everything. Okay, and I started life. I've been in the financial industry for about 20. I've been married 22 years. So yeah, about 22 years. Funny enough, which is quite a long time. And I started life. I don't know about yourselves, but my parents, my dad's from Ghana, my mum's from Jamaica. So it's all about Richard, go and get the books, go and get your study, go and get your GCSEs, and then you'll when you grow up, you'll have a good job and make money and do better than us. Um, Anyone experience that in their lives? Maybe so, but I haven't. I certainly didn't experience making loads of money. I did loads of studying. In fact, I left uni at age 28 with, I say, 2.5 degrees in engineering. Okay, and that's another long story. But I've got 20 years background in finances. So I've basically started off working as a debt collector for the Halifax Bank. You ever heard of the Halifax? I've worked. So I was one calling to pay your credit card debt, or I'll go in your account and take the money out, all that kind of stuff. I make arrangements. I was working for a law firm called Evershed Solicitors. So I'd contact managing directors of lots of companies that hire out expensive vending machines, and then they'll be in debt, and I'd have to contact them, and they didn't pay up. I'd then issue the CCJs. So I was just learning. It was a part-time job for me when I was studying, but it's still the financial industry. Then I got involved in the other side with a company called Banco Santander, or Abbey National. I was living up in Bradford at the time, and I was helping people with their mortgages, getting them in debt, doing further improvement loans. And at that time, the market was booming. House prices were going up and up and up. This is around about 2003, 2004. And the interest rates were super low at that time, so people were going crazy. House prices were going crazy. But me and my wife, as students, bought our first house in Bradford for £60,000. All right, as students. So we were really happy. Lovely 3-bedroom property in Bradford. Studying. I was doing my PhD at the time. My wife Tracy, she was doing a teaching degree. And then basically I got a graduate position with the same bank, Banco Santander, and I was now doing my financial advisor qualifications and working with financial advisors as a sales consultant, encouraging them to buy Scottish Provident products, life insurance, investment products, etc., etc. But all this time I'm seeing the brokers making all this money, and my goal was to be a millionaire by age 30. At that time I was about age 28. So I realized I'm not on no track to get hit £1 million in 2 years. So I quit my job, started my own mortgage company or brokerage company called the Financial Answer. You get it? Answer Limited. Yes. And between me and my wife, we accumulated 28 properties. I employed 2 staff beyond myself in my business. I was doing extremely well. Life was awesome. Yeah, making loads of money from properties, making loads of money from the mortgage business. In fact, I was even contemplating expanding the business up and down the country. That's how progressive it was at the time. And life was good. In fact, on paper, we were property millionaires, right? With 28 properties. We were, multi-millionaires actually. So my plan was, keep them for 7 years, because I was told, every 7 years property prices double, sell the properties, have the liquid cash, and then we'll go on and, live in the Bahamas somewhere and live life. It was awesome. Yeah, but it wasn't always that way, unfortunately. Anyone heard of the 2007 crash, financial crash? Yeah. The credit crunch, so to speak. So overnight, my mortgage business just kind of folded. I had to liquidate my staff, shut down the business, and then of these properties that I had to maintain, and they weren't all being serviceable by the rents. Long story cut short, I realized how the financial system worked. went into some serious problems, but I was also determined to find out how to make changes, how to do better next time round. So effectively, I went bankrupt. Me and my wife, we were made bankrupt. We didn't went bankrupt. We were made bankrupt. It was a big controversy. I found out how money works, and I started a business before going bankrupt. In fact, I started a business which I still run today, sister company called Wealth Guardian Education. And the whole premise, and I've been teaching about generational wealth for 20 odd years, really, is to teach people not to make the same mistakes that I myself had made. Bearing in mind, you got to understand, I'd done the exams, got the mortgage broker qualifications, advising people into millions of pounds of debt, and never got told about bubbles, never got told about the ebbs and flow of finance and the stock market and what's the credit crunch, how does that work? So long story cut short, we got in problems, but I never lost my house. In fact, everything I wanted to keep, we kept because I understood how the game works. So one of the things, one of my mottos is learn the rules of the game, and that's why you're here today, so you can play the game better. So if you want to find out how do you go bankrupt and keep your properties and keep on learning, keep on watching, you're in the right place. We're going to talk about that today. So after the bankruptcy, kept on with Wealth Guardian Education, kept on teaching, kept on learning, and my passion literally is to help people not make the same mistakes that I did. Generational wealth is a massive subject. And one thing that we're not taught in schools, not taught in pretty much any circumstance, any sphere of influence or situation is money, how to manage it, how to make more of it, how to protect it. These things are not taught unless you have parents that are able to show you what to do, or like me, you made the mistakes and then had to figure it out the hard way. So ultimately, here I am now, 20 odd years later, and very happy, in a very happy space, being able and privileged to share my story, share education, share tips, wisdom, nuggets of knowledge with yourselves. And I came to know Daryl in that whole journey as well. So thanks, Daryl, for inviting me. I really appreciate that. So not to labor on the point too much, because we've got a lot of things to go through in a very short period of time. Are you guys open to learning a lot? Because we've got a lot of things to go through. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's a small group. I prefer small groups, only because I can control questions better and we can remain focused. What I'm going to be doing, I'm sure Darryl will take the questions if you have any, but just put it in the chat box if you got any. Then Darryl will just moderate that. I'm going to get started with regards to will. So I'm going to share my screen, and ultimately, what we're going to do is, a will is a tool. A trust is a tool. You need to understand how to manage that information to make the right decisions and make the right choices. Now, you probably see me. Can you see my screen okay, everyone? Everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, awesome. So you've probably heard me say before. If not, I'm going to say it again. There's facets to wealth that we must understand. And and I learned this from Robert Kiyosaki. It's not my own wisdom, so I own it now. But if you got to read lots of books and understand how to make it your own. And there's 5 facets. I hope you can read my doctor's handwriting to wealth. Okay. Now, the first one is, it's in my mind, the most important: how to make money. Okay. If you're running a business, in a job, doesn't matter. But you especially now in these times when we're hearing about inflation, hearing about, does everyone actually know what inflation is? Or who doesn't know? Maybe that's a better question to ask. What inflation is and the effects of it. Okay. So ultimately, you're probably wondering when you go to do your shopping. Even yesterday, my wife did the shopping for 2.5 bags, 65 quid. Normally, that would have been £50. So your money is getting you less and less and less. All right. So you're trying to live the same life, and it's costing you more. All right. Now, if you do your own research, and Winston Churchill said it like this: the farther back you look in history, the further forward you can see in the future. Something called hyperinflation is nothing new. It's something that's been going on since biblical days, to be fair. But ultimately, we're in a system where if you're not, like me, not prepared and get caught blindsided, that's where it hurts the most. So being able to make money is important. Having multiple streams, hence working with Daryl, is very important. So you can ride that wave and ultimately look for opportunities when others are panicking. All right, because wealth is not necessarily created or destroyed; it's transferred. So what side of the fence are you going to be sitting on? Are you going to sit on the side where you're going to be losing it, or are you going to sit on the side where you're going to be ready to receive it all? All right. And one of my favorite speakers, Les Brown, I don't know if you've seen the skit or his sketch, so to speak, where he says about you got to be hungry. Anyone seen that before? Yeah. And he's talking about, drink rock, drink rock, drink. He's ready for an opportunity. And what is an opportunity? Literally, or what is luck, should I say, is when preparation meets opportunity. So you've got to understand that you're here now to be prepared, yeah? Because you're waiting for an opportunity to come. And when that opportunity does come, you're not going to get blindsided and you can make more and enjoy it. While others, unfortunately, may not even see the wood from the trees, all right? So number one skill, how to make more money. Number two is how to manage that money, all right? You're making it, you got to manage it, okay? Most people win, or those who win the lottery, you've probably heard the story, within 2 years, they're broke again. Why? Because they don't know how to manage this stuff, all right? Number three, how to protect your wealth. You might want to write this next thing down. It's not how much money that you make, all right, that defines your wealth. Okay, it's how much money you keep. I repeat, wealth is not defined as how much money you make, right? Wealth is defined by how much money you keep. So you need to know how to protect your wealth. All right. Number four is leverage or growth. You need to know how to grow your money. If you just keep it in a bank account, I've talked about inflation already, you realize it's just going to be, it's going to be worthless. Those who are rich, well, let me rephrase the question. We operate with a system called currency, yeah? Not money. We call it money, but it's actually currency, all right? And I'm not going to go into the difference between currency and money right now. You have to probably research that. But ultimately, currency means that it has to keep moving like an electric current. It doesn't stay stagnant. So the wealthy don't keep all their money in the bank account and look at it on a screen every day and say, yes, I'm doing okay. All right, they have to keep making it work for them. It has to grow. So they need to leverage. It has to be moving. And then they buy assets that will continue to preserve their wealth. Does everyone understand where I'm coming from? So you've got to understand the power of leverage and growth. And it's not just about the stock market and understanding how to trade and how to hold it for donkey's years and hope it will grow. That's just one facet of a system. Things like physical gold and silver, other tangible assets, commodities, businesses, where people always have a need, is where you're going to be able to grow. All right. Anyway, another topic. I'm not going to get off topic. I'm good at that. And then number five, change colour of the pen, is getting the right information. Now, I don't know if anyone's ever been in the armed services before. I haven't, but you've probably seen the movies. One of my favourites is like Jason Bourne, yeah? And loads of these military movies that you see on TV or the movies. And they always talk about having the right intelligence. The intelligence was poor, so therefore we got blindsided. We got attacked, we got ambushed because the intelligence, the information was wrong. Now, if you're one of those people, not I'm saying you are, listen to the Daily Mail, read the Daily Mail, read The Sun, read rubbish, don't read books. I tell people, I have books worth a couple of grand. Yeah, I have no problem buying a book, 500, 600 pounds, to get information that I need. And the reason why they probably price those books that high is because the average person's not going to spend that kind of money. But the average person would spend that kind of money on a pair of trainers to get the latest Jordans or whatever. And we need to understand where is your value. What's the best investment you can ever make? I'm sure Daryl's probably taught you this. What's the best investment you can ever make in your lifetime? Are you able to unmute or put in the chat?
Some people have posted in the chat box, but unmute. Those of you who have posted in the chat box, just unmute
yourself. Invest in yourself.
Exactly. All right.
Your health, in your health as well.
Yeah, that's all inclusive, isn't it? Your health, your education, anything you do for yourself, because you're infinite. You are infinite in how you are, in how you operate, and how you're designed. So anything you do to better yourself will always manifest. We are created to produce. So you have to invest in yourself, and don't ever put a limit on what that amount may be. All right. So thank you for that response. So information and accurate information is here. That's why you're here today. All right. To educate yourself and get the right information. And if you can increase even 10% in each of these areas, so increasing your knowledge and taking action on it, being able to make more money and learn how to do that, just increase by 10% in each area, then ultimately we can start to build wealth the way we need to, the way we want to see it happening. All right. And that's important. And my job is to facilitate that. And ultimately, how do you pass wealth down? By teaching your family and your loved ones these skills. All right. And so anyone, is everyone here a parent or have children or an auntie, uncle? Yeah. We need to understand the power of being custodians to wealth. And that's how the rich work. All right. They're not alive today to enjoy, let's get the spelling right, that would help, to enjoy their money. They're alive today to make sure that all that wealth, just as they've inherited it, passes down to the next generation and the generation and the generation and the generation after that. All right. So custodians to wealth, we have to have that mindset that it's not about us. Okay. It's about we're passing it down to the next generation and beyond. And that's where we get the notion of generational wealth. All right. So when you got the Duke of Westminster, who, obviously his family has been wealthy for centuries, but the mantle's still on that man to pass in generation down to his son. But he did it tax-free. How does that work? How does that work? Yeah. Because obviously it's a headache to manage money. All right. People think it's easy to make a lot of money and that's it. No. It's a headache to keep it and protect it and to grow it and to make sure that, and even, protection from tax is asset protection. So how do you make sure that it stays in the wealth in your family members and not in the hands of others? And you've heard the phrase, if you fail to plan, obviously you plan to fail, but if you don't have a plan for yourself, then someone else will make a plan for you. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about wills, okay? And the first section you might want to write down is what we call the rules of intestacy. Anyone heard of that before? Or who's not heard of that? Maybe that'd be easier. Just type in a 1 if you have and a 2 if you have not heard of the term rules of intestacy. I'm waiting. If it just...
Some of them are coming to me directly, okay. So I've got a couple that are saying not. There's a question that came up asked when you're ready for it, Richard, as well. So most of them are putting the 2.
Most of them put it 2, so they have not. All right. So the rules of intestacy is literally what I call a government will, and I've sent Daryl a sheet that you can have a copy of it to keep for your own purposes later on. Not right now, but to have for future record. What was the question?
The question was, is property part of growing money?
It depends. It depends. And the reason why I say that, because I'm not an advocate of debt. And I say it because obviously I used to be a mortgage broker, so I've got a lot of people in debt. Now, some people advocate using debt. I don't, because most people don't. I've not been schooled or trained in how to manage debt properly. I don't think it's a good idea to have debt in your own name. Most people who are wealthy would never have anything in their own name, but they don't tell you that in their books. They don't tell you that in their YouTube videos. But they're advocating you're a dummy, so to speak, for not having debt, and intimidating and all that kind of foolishness. So ultimately, I don't think necessarily owning property is the best way for, what was the term, making money, was it? Or to manage money?
The term was, is property part of growing money?
Growing money. And also, we're told, and I don't want to get too technical with the question, but we're told that, I believed it, that, property prices are always going up. If you look at it, historically, property prices are always going up. Maybe I should draw this on so you can see before I go into the intensity rules. And it's a good question. Typically, it's a very poor example. If it's time and that's prices, then property prices have always gone up. And this could be like 100 years plus. But what people don't understand is that money, okay, is not a finite commodity or currency, should I say. So before, if we looked at value, probably value would be the best way to look at it over time, then money would you could just know, before, back in the day, before Thatcher's days, if you're old enough to remember Thatcher, you could go to any shop and buy a pint of milk and they'd all be the same price. A loaf of bread would all be the same price. If you bought an item of clothing, normally it would be the same price based on brand, obviously, but you know where you stand every single week. You get your wage, you do your shopping, and you could literally budget without having to worry about price fluctuations. And then we had introduced certain things over time when world wars take place and situations take place. And so now we're seeing money's going up and up and up. And we're thinking, my house is worth more because money's been printed more and more. Okay. So there's multiple trillions of pounds flowing in the system, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're wealthier. Okay. Especially if you're comparing apples to apples, i.e. you're looking at the currency in your hands and the price of a house today. If you was to compare it to something different, like say gold or some other commodity, you'd realize, well, actually that's not the case. So people are deceived when they think, I bought my house for 100 grand last year or 10 years ago and it's worth £1 million today. That's because the money system is inflation, all right? So it's a deception. So is it growing our wealth? If you manage it right. So sell the house, you've got the extra income, great. Buy something with it, manage that, perfect. But if you just look at it on paper and think, well, yeah, I'm rich on paper, I personally disagree with that. And I think those who understand money properly will tell you the truth. But you're never going to hear that from a property guru or anything like that. Most people say, well, house prices are always going up and up and up, so you can't go wrong with houses. You're rich on paper, which is fair enough if you're using the pound system today and you're fortunate enough to buy things. But as long as you can convert, as I said before, moving that money, convert it to something that is not valuable. I see you can buy stuff with currency, but it's worth a penny. You hold a £20 note, £50 note in your hand. That note is technically worth a penny to produce. It can only allow you to do certain things. So you've got to convert it into something of value. The house itself, people will pay money for it because people need somewhere to live. Absolutely. Does it mean that you're growing your wealth? Technically speaking, I don't really agree with that, unless you can convert it into something else. And the other argument is this: if you need money tomorrow and no one can borrow it, can you sell your house? Yes or no? If no, because most people only can afford to get £1 million house because the bank are happy to lend them £1 million. Yes or no? So the house is only worth £1 million because someone can afford to borrow £1 million. This is called supply and demand. So the day that the bank stops lending that kind of money, well, is your house worth £1 million? No, because no one can borrow that money anymore. And it's the question you've got to ask yourself. So it's all, in my mind, a deception. But the point I was going to ask you is, if you can sell it today, great. If you can't sell it today, you're stuck. Yes or no? Yeah. So it's a liquid. You can't. And then people will rip you off and say, I will buy it off you for half the price to get it off your hands so that you got the pressure off you of debt and repossession, blah, blah, blah. To me, it's a complete con. So you just need to understand the bigger picture, which we're not taught. But it is a tool. You just got to manage it right. I hope I've not messed up the question, but the long and short of it is, it's not just about owning houses. It's knowing what to do with them, knowing that if you have no mortgages, you're fine. Because whatever the system of money is in play, you'll always do well because someone always needs somewhere to live and a roof over their head. When you look at things like hyperinflation and you see the history of what's happened, and I'm going to move on to the point in a minute, but the current country, I think it's Venezuela, if I'm correct, had to go to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency to survive because the US dollar, they couldn't use it for sanctions, and their own currency was worthless. Yeah, trillions of their currency to buy one loaf of bread. It doesn't make any sense, right? So they had to go to default to something that everyone in the world could perceive as valuable, which is crypto. The last example, Zimbabwe, a black market, people don't recognize gold and silver to trade. So what do you have in your hands that's valuable that you can utilize? Hence, just sticking to currency pounds in your bank account is not necessarily the notion of growing your money. You have to have assets that you can always utilize and win. Okay, that's a long story cut short. So back to the main part, rules of intestacy, okay, which I call a government will. Because if you don't have a will and something happens to you, like something happened to you yesterday, then there's a term called you die in testate. Might want to write that down. Okay. So if you die with no will, you die intestate. And the law of succession is called the rules of intestacy. So basically the government will give everyone a default will to pass their assets down to their loved ones if you haven't established a will for yourself. Have I explained that okay? All right. So I'm going to bring up a graphic for you to see, so I can break it down for you. Let me find it. That'll be good. All right. Everyone can see that okay? Or do you see a blackboard?
It's the same slide.
Okay, let me just change that. Why does that always happen to me with Zoom?
So when you talk about the government will, it always makes you think of, technically everyone has a will, it's just not what you want.
Right, exactly.
If there's any questions, feel free to post them in the chat box or just take yourself off mute.
Actually, no. Darryl, are you able to make me the host? I think that's why I keep having to keep changing, because it's not recognizing my screen.
There you go.
Okay, try again. Oh, no different. Don't worry about it. I'll just keep shopping and changing. It's fine. So you should see this graphic now. Can you see on my screen?
Yeah.
Right. So laws or rules of intestacy. So I'm going to start and break it down. Let's say if you're single. All right. So ask the question, and you can find this out. Just go on rules of intestacy gov. It's a .gov website. Just put laws of intestacy, and it'll answer the question and show you this kind of graph in a practical way. So it says surviving spouse or civil partner. So you're not married, so there would be no. And if anyone passed away and you're not married and you had children, it goes all to the children. Now let's just stop right there. If you had children and not married and you're happy in love with your spouse, so let's say you're cohabiting, what's it called, common law relationship, whatever that is. Let's say you haven't bought a house together yet, but you're living together. You want to make sure, if let's say you're the husband, you're the male partner, and the the lady passes away, or the partner passes away, but all of that what you've built together over donkey's years just goes straight to the children. Now, let's say it was a blended relationship, so you met someone who had children already, and you had more children with that partner. All right, maybe I should draw that out just so you can see where I'm coming from. All right, and we're going to talk about if you're single. So single would define even, common law relationships. Is that the right way to say it? Common law? I don't know what's the best way to call it. Or you're just in a relationship but not married.
Hooked up.
Right? And then there's people been together for donkey's years, 20, 30 years, been faithful, just never ever never got married. Now let's say, you've got, what name should I choose, Daryl?
Winston. We're still seeing the law of intestacy screen.
Ah, keep on forgetting. Sorry, guys.
Or Delroy.
Right, resume share. Why is that happening? Okay. Right, you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have common law or a relationship, they're not married. You got Winston.
Sorry, can I just interrupt?
You can.
Before I could see the screen, now I can't.
Can everyone else see the screen?
Can everyone see the screen or not?
Everyone else can.
Yeah, we can see the screen.
I can't.
You might have
I just saw the graph, but I can't see it now. You've changed it.
All right, I'm just double checking what I did.
Everyone else can see.
Yeah, we can see a man and woman. Well,
yeah,
that's what it's meant to be anyway.
Yeah, okay.
That's what it's meant to be. Okay, cool.
Yes.
That's fine then. Okay, I can see that.
It's supposed to be man and woman. You can see my drawing, ain't that great,
Linda
right?
could see the screen all the time. She just couldn't tell where it was.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's all right. So, yeah, Winston is, okay, cool. All right, so they're together and they have children.
That's the children, Linda.
Okay, now let's say...
Okay, thank you.
Who was it? Winston and who? What was the other name?
Let's go, Marcia.
Yeah, and we have I don't know, Marlon and give me a name for a child. Someone.
Candisha.
What?
All right, Sonia will do.
I just started Candisha now. Cool. All right, so so now let's say Marlon and Candisha are Marcia's children. Marcia meets Winston, and then they're together for further 20 years. But in that relationship, Marcia had 2 more children for Winston. I won't put names. So Marcia has 4 children. Okay? Now, let's put this in perspective. If, let's say Marcia passed away first, okay? Let's put a line through here. If Marcia passed away first, what the rules of intestacy are saying, without a will, anything that Marcia has and owns, okay, will go straight to all 4 of her children. Now, do you think Winston would be happy that he has 2 children, but whatever wealth they've built up, let's say it's in Marcia's name for things happen, you don't know, goes to all 4 children? Okay, it's a rhetorical question, so you can think that in your own mind. You don't need to answer the question. But is that something you'd be happy with if that were you? Yeah, and vice versa. If Winston had children before coming to a relationship and you built something together, do you understand? Let's say you bought a house together, yeah, and in joint names. So let's start again so you can see what I'm doing. So let's say you bought a house together. All right, that house is now worth, let's say, I don't know, £200,000. Same scenario with Marcia and Winston, but now you own a house. Marcia passes away, house is in joint names, but because it's in joint names, the whole of the house goes to Winston by default, okay? By default. And let's say Winston had the children. Let's switch it over a little bit. Let's just say Winston had children in previous relationships that you have no idea. Marcia has no idea who those children are, okay? Marcia passes away. Let's say he's got 6 kids. I've seen scenarios like this, okay? Let's say he's got 6 kids before even meeting Marcia. Marcia passes away, and now everything they work together is all in Winston's name. 200 grand house, any savings, okay? So the house goes to Winston. Marcia's children gets her assets, but the house goes to Winston because it's a joint mortgage, no will. So it's joint ownership. Everything goes to Winston. Marcia passes away. She has 2 children from Winston, so her 2 children might get something. But do you not think that share that house should go to the children as well? Yes or no?
Mm.
Yeah? Share that house should go to the children as well. But do you think the children will see it? Do you think Marlon may not care? It might be, and vice versa. And you can see how scenarios can go and get complicated just by having a government will. So basically the point I'm trying to make is you want to have not just ownership, but you also need to have control.
Sorry, I knew that this story you've just said, I knew it happened to somebody. I know somebody it happened to. The mother died, she had a partner, had a son, and she died, and the partner never gave the daughter anything.
No.
She was just left out in the cold.
Yeah. And you see it over and over again. You know, even in my parents' generation, you hear about it all the time. Yeah. So if we're going to go back, I'm going to change the screen again. If I can find it. Just 1 second. There we go. Right, so now you should see the graph of the law of intensity. Everyone sees that? The flow chart? Everyone see that?
Yep.
Right, so if you're single and you have children, then children or it says children or other descendants take the whole estate. No children goes to parents if they're alive. If parents are not alive, it goes to your surviving siblings. I've met people who don't get on with their siblings. All right? No siblings, half siblings or step siblings. No step siblings, grandparents if they're alive. No grandparents are alive, aunts and uncles, you may not get on with them. No aunts and uncles, goes to half aunts and uncles. Can't find anyone, goes to the state. Bona vacantia. Would you like all your wealth going to the States? All right. So you need to plan. Now let's look at if you are married. Okay. So it starts the question: surviving spouse, civil partner. Yes. All right. So if it's yes, do they have children? Yes. Okay. So you're married. You have children. The first £270,000 goes to the surviving spouse. And then everything else is split 50-50 between the children and the spouse. Now, that might sound okay if you don't own anything over 270 grand. But even then, if you own anything over 270 grand, your children don't get anything. And there's no guarantee they will get anything. All right? So that's important, okay? If you own assets over 270,000, most people do. If you own a house for longer than 5 years or so, you have life insurance, you've got a business, you own properties, etc., and you're married, then the wealth is going to be normally significantly more than £270,000. So without a will, is that something that you'd be happy with, to know that, well, your spouse gets 270 grand, and then the rest is split 50-50 between your spouse and the children? And then when you look at the relationships that we just went through, whether they're blended relationships, previous history, divorce, children from previous relationships, etc., or even remarriage, okay, are you happy that everything you've worked together with your current spouse, if they get remarried, potentially your children could lose out? Okay, so you need to understand. Any questions on this?
Yeah. Sorry. So what happens if you're married
Sierra,
and believed to be Sierra,
yeah.
believed to be divorced.
Yeah.
But that you can't find no decree absolute. But before I'll give you actually the scenario. So basically, my husband's dad, he died, and he always said he was divorced from his wife, which he hadn't been with his wife for about 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
But he silly didn't do a will.
Okay.
But there's been a bit of an argument in terms of the court wanting a decree absolute, but none can be found. And because he's estranged from the wife, we don't know how to get her or know where she is, to even know where she would be. So everything's just in holding now. The government, they won't release the money or his estate.
Right. Yeah. So if the divorce, the decree absolute took place, and that would be recorded somewhere, just like someone being born, someone dying, someone getting married, that would be recorded. So it would be assumed that they were just estranged and not divorced. And if that's the case, it might be in holding because obviously it's probate, right? So until probate's been granted, and that might take some time, then effectively the assets will be split between as you see here. It depends on the timing of obviously when the spouse passed or the estranged spouse passed away, because the figures might be different. But ultimately, if they were married, and depending on if they both had children together or not, I don't know how the scenario is, then ultimately it could go to her, because the rules were different before. The old rules was everything went to the spouse.
Yes.
Everything went to the spouse first. This only got changed in 2020 to 270 goes to the spouse first, then half and half. So that's a tough one. Unfortunately, how long ago did the death take place?
February.
Right. So it might be possible, but again, you're going to need all the beneficiaries' permissions, and if you can't find the estranged wife, it's still going to be a problem. But within 2 years, you can vary the estates, even without a will, as long as the beneficiaries agree. All right. So you can hire companies to trace individuals. There are specialist trace companies to find them. So that's probably the best I can say for now. All right. No problem. But you can see the issue here is the families are the ones that suffer. When we're gone, the only ones that are suffering are the families. And so when we talk about generational wealth, especially me as an estate planner, it's making sure, even to plan the funeral, to make sure that families can grieve and can go through this process without the aggro and the headache and the stress sometimes. Yeah. People change. Money is an amplifier. I don't know if you've heard that before, like alcohol. So people's true colors will be revealed when they realize that they've got some inheritance around the corner. They're someone who's your best mate and looked after you with absolute grace and love, their true colors unfortunately will manifest when they realize that amount of money is due to them and they may not get it. And in fact, there's people who have fallen out, siblings are just not talking to each other, going to court, the whole works. It's quite nasty, and that will cause sickness and stress and unnecessary grief. And had that person who was alive, if they were alive, had just done some planning, this could prevent all of this unnecessary problems, on top of grieving for the loss of a loved one. Yeah, and I see often, people are motivated to make sure that they get their wills in place, get their trust in place, a funeral plan in place, etc., to prevent the problems that they've gone through themselves, because it's horrible. If you love your children, you don't want them to go through that for money. At the end of the day, why? So it's important that we understand here that if you don't have a will, that's the point I'm trying to make. The government will give you one, and if your situation is outside of the so-called norm, quote unquote, it may not be favourable to you. And if you're not even aware of that 2-year rule, because whoever's been made the representative is not really doing a good job or don't really care, not going to get legal advice, and that two years have gone, it's too late to make any changes. All right. So, and plus it's more expense. It could have been prevented had the will been done in the first place, had the funeral plan been done in the first place, you know how much it costs to buy land today to get buried. Just a plot of land today, if you want a particular burial plot, nearly it could be up to £60,000. Yeah. On average, I think the ones I live near Tottenham, Tottenham burial ground, I think like the last tech was like £12,000, and there's only a 60-year lease on them, and you got to find 12 grand plus the burial, plus the whole 9 night and all that kind of stuff. If you're into that, it's expensive. Okay, so planning is the name of the game. And again, if you fail to plan, it's going to cause a real problem, especially if it's a sudden death, unexpected death. It can be a real problem to families. So, with that said, I'm just checking my notes here.
I've got 2 questions when you're ready, Rich.
Okay, fire away.
What happens if you're married? I think this was answered, but I'll say it anyway. What happens if you are married, but separated, and one person dies? Will it go to the husband, wife, or the children?
Well, we're going to cover that.
Cool. Let me leave that one.
Well, actually, I can answer it now because it's here. So if you're married, and what was it? Sorry, and
married, separated.
Yeah.
And one person dies. Will it go to the husband, wife, or the children?
Well, let's see. So married, yes. Not divorced, separated, okay. Have children, yes. So if it was a death before after 2020, the first £270,000 will go to the surviving spouse. Now it depends on other dynamics. So for example, if you have a joint mortgage or joint ownership of a house, then that by default goes to the surviving spouse, all of it, by succession. You've got joint bank accounts, all of that will go to the surviving spouse by default. Yeah, so I advise people to separate everything. Don't have joint accounts. Sever any, and we'll go through this shortly, sever any tenancy so you own your half or your share, especially if you put in all the deposit and stuff like that. We're going to talk about that later on. But ultimately, if it's 9 times out of 10, people don't do this. So it'll be a joint asset. So that will go to the surviving spouse automatically. Now, if it's an estranged spouse, especially the children not getting on with that spouse, then they may not get anything, especially if they draft a will, the surviving spouse, and leave the children out. So, yeah, so the first 270 goes to, outside of anything that's gone by default, goes to the spouse, surviving spouse, and half, plus all of the personal chattels as well. So if you have wedding rings, eternity rings, heirlooms, things that are value to you that you wanted to pass to your children, well, that goes to the surviving spouse by default. All right? And then anything else that remains is 50-50, absolutely, between the children and the surviving spouse.
Cool.
Yeah, we're going to talk about divorce later on because even that's a whole other issue with the law changing in April with the no-fault divorce. People can be absolutely, not judging anyone, but, for them to have a divorce in the first place and there's a valid reason for it, being unfaithful, etc., there's no one's at fault, so you still lose everything anyway. How does that work? Okay, so it's not good. You got to start planning now and reevaluating relationships. Yeah. So
if you have a will, it's fine. If you stipulate who you want to leave it to, nobody can come and contest it, can they?
Well, that's another topic as well.
Okay.
If you will cover this, but just in case I forget, if you draft a will and deliberately leave beneficiaries out, when I say beneficiaries, those who would expect to receive, i.e. children, if you're married, a surviving spouse, then they have a right. There's a law that gives them the right to make a claim if they feel that they've been discredited in any way, or not equally benefited in any way. Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah. So having said that, Daryl, could we do a Q&A up to question 3?
Remind me where to stop, yeah?
Okay.
I think so.
Let me change my screen. So we've covered intestacy rules. I'm going to change my screen again. So you should see a blackboard. Chalkboard, rather. Now we're going to talk about wills. Right, so it is imperative.
Are you sharing, Rich?
I am. Can you not see me? 1 second.
Yeah.
Can you see me now?
Yeah.
Everyone sees the board? Fantastic. So we're going to go into wills. So we looked at intestacy, and that's the situation where someone dies without a will, they die intestate, and the government will basically give them their own version. So again, I repeat, the whole purpose is to have not just ownership, but control, even after death, so that your loved ones or those who you want to benefit will benefit, okay? Now, wills can be really, really, really simple. It just depends on your situation, okay? And they can also be quite complex. My pen's actually not funny. All right? It just depends on the situation. Now, the reason why will we get complex is down to tax and obviously your intent, i.e. most people don't want to pay tax or don't want their family to be receive their benefit less 40% of tax. Now, the tax that I'm referring to, which everyone's heard about, is inheritance tax. Okay, that's the biggest one, and that is currently at 40%. Okay, now the point of it, how it works is if someone passes away, and their assets are, if your assets are greater than £325,000, it's been about 17 years stuck at that amount at the moment. Okay, this number here is termed the nil rate band. There's different ones, but this is specific to inheritance tax or IHT. Okay, and anyone who wants to get all technical, that's based on the Inheritance Tax Act 1984. Okay, so it's due to be revised. So they say in 2026 we will see. House prices in the last 17 years have probably quadrupled, not just doubled, and this figure has stayed the same. So the government, as you can imagine, are cashing in significantly. In fact, what I'll do, if Daryl reminds me, I'll send you some information in terms of every quarter the Treasury releases how much money they've made, and it seems like every quarter, in terms of inheritance tax revenues, it's doubled in the multiple billions of pounds. So in other words, people have died, not made a will, and the government are cashing in bona vacantia because no one's been bothered to manage their affairs properly. Does anyone ever understand that? Yeah, or they've had to pay inheritance tax, and so it's the coffers or the accounts of the Treasury is increasing all the time because of that tax called inheritance tax, because no one's planned it. Now, I think it might have been George Osborne, don't quote me on this, that said if you die and pay inheritance tax, it's your fault. I mean, I don't normally get involved with politics, but I'm inclined to agree with George Osborne on this. If he did quote that on this particular instance, you don't have to pay any tax, in fact, right? But I'm not going to get in that one right now. Specific to inheritance tax, or we call capital taxes, inheritance tax, capital gains tax, certain types of income tax, but mainly inheritance tax, it doesn't have to be paid with unless you have the right planning in place. Okay, so we need to understand that first and foremost. So again, you don't need to answer this as a rhetorical question, but I'm pretty sure most people, especially if you own a home or you're due to inherit at some point in the future, at your estate. And the definition of an estate is basically if you just added up everything that you own as an asset, savings, investments, life insurance, property, in terms of the equity in the property, the value of the property, any inheritance that are potentially due to you. If you added that all up everywhere around the world, because unless you have a will, that's another thing you need to be aware of, that any assets you own worldwide will be considered. So if you have properties around the world or know people who have other properties in different parts of the world and haven't been bothered to get a will yet, then all assets, all inheritance, wherever they may lie, if it's in your name or contingent to you receiving it, contingency means that something will have to happen before you receive it. So if it's contingent to you receiving it, i.e. someone will have to pass away first, i.e. an inheritance, then that will be classed as a UK asset, and for tax purposes will be taxed on a UK basis. And that may not be good for you. All right? So ultimately, the reason why we start using the will is a planning tool. And I mentioned the word tool. It's a tool, all right? I don't like the term will writer because that's not the only thing I do. I don't just draft wills, okay? So a will is a tool, all right? There are other tools that you need to have in your arsenal to help mitigate or reduce tax as much as possible. And there's a resource that you need, okay? My spelling today, gosh. As my mum will say, just smile and nod, okay? If you see a spelling mistake, just smile and nod and we will move on, all right? Okay, so a resource beginning with T, you cannot finish off the spelling. Anyone care to for time's sake, I will give it away anyway. All right. The more time you have towards planning, the more likely you are to mitigate, or when I say mitigate, you're gonna avoid any inheritance tax whatsoever. Okay, the sooner you get started, and that's why I talk about having custodians to wealth, because if you've got someone in the generation before you doing the planning, it just makes life for you or your other generations after you much easier to plan, right? And I find, and one of the main reasons why I do this is for my community, people who look like me, whatever shade that may be, okay? Because I know it seems to be a challenge, and I have no qualm in saying this, that in terms of inheritances, being able to help children buy a property for the first time, for example, and I've got to be careful when I say look like me. My dad's from Ghana, my mum's from Jamaica, as I mentioned. I'm born here. Now, I have friends who their parents are from Africa, whether that may be Nigeria, Ghana, whatever, and their wealth is still back home. They're sending money back home. So they can always move back to their village or town or whatever and live large with their servants and everything else at any time, okay? I don't have that luxury. And there's lots of people probably like myself who don't have that luxury. So I'm talking about those, it's a very specific group of people who can't go back to Jamaica because they don't have family or resources or wealth back home, can't go back to Africa or wherever you may be from because you don't have that backative, as my mum would say. You don't have that family relationship or whatever back home, okay? You're just here. Here is all you know, all right? And if that is the case, what wealth do you have? So I've got friends who do look like me, but their parents are already wealthy, so they can pay the deposit down. Not a problem. But I also got friends who, unfortunately, it's just them, and their parents can't afford to give them anything to pay down on the house for a first-time deposit or start that business, or even just an inheritance, 5 grand, 10 grand, 20 grand, 100 grand, because they've never planned for it. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about necessarily you can go back home or to your home of origin, shall I say, at any time. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about there is no backup. So you are the start and you are the finish. What is your plan? Yeah? And unfortunately, our parents, we owned the big houses back in the day. Gentrification's taken place. They no longer own those big houses for whatever reason that might be, and that wealth is now, as I said, it's not created or destroyed, it's just transferred, and we don't have that wealth anymore. So we have to figure out how do we turn that clock back or change the narrative in that respect. And it comes with planning and it comes with education. So that's one of my passions, okay, and why I do this and why I teach for everyone, but specifically for those who are in that situation. And so ultimately, you now know, because I tell this to my children, to know something and not to do is the same as not knowing at all. All right. And you have no excuse now, really, because you understand what's going on. So the reason why I'm talking about having a will is that you both have ownership and control of your assets, of your estate. We'll come on to divorce shortly because it's actually a very important topic of discussion. But especially if you're married, and we're talking about tax and having control via a will, there's a lot of tax benefits for being married and generating a will. Okay? Now, one of the benefits, am I doing all right, Daryl? Is there any questions or, yeah? Is everyone doing all right? Because it can be a bit of a dry topic, so I'm trying to make it as entertaining or riveting as possible without putting you on to sleep. So is everyone doing okay? You're making notes as well. I would say, I know you're told to make notes, I would kind of say don't make notes and engage in what I'm saying with you, because sometimes you might miss something really pertinent because you're making notes. That's just my take on it, but it's up to you, yeah? You got to understand, whether you're single and in a relationship, not a problem. You can still plan. If you have no intention of getting married, not a problem. And you got children and you've been with that partner for donkey's years and you know you're never going to get married, not a problem. We just have to do a different strategy of planning. Okay, you can still not pay inheritance tax if that's your choice. Okay, if you are married, the government has put in a lot more perks for those who are married, so you can plan even easier or more easily for those who are married. So it's not about you have to get married to enjoy the perks. Although there have been, very well documented marriages of convenience. I think Ken Dodd, on his deathbed, got married to pass his millions of pounds to a much younger lady, all right, to save inheritance tax. Yeah, so if it's a marriage of convenience, potentially, but if that's a tax strategy, it's a tax strategy. But ultimately, you can plan. As I said, time is your friend. So the sooner you get involved with this, the better it may be. All right. So let's start with those who are married and what are the tax perks. And then I can, without getting too technical, because I like the technical side of it, Darryl will tell you that. Okay, married and having a will. So, number one, if you're married, and these nuptial agreements or settlements, as they're called, you are seen as one. Okay, so two people, and I guess it's biblical, okay, are seen as one. Okay, they come together as one. So if one party dies or passes away, why am I doing this? If one party dies or passes away, automatically with a will, okay, because now you've got the person's giving their instruction via a will, 100% of the assets passes to the surviving spouse. Okay, upon death. Not just the assets that you have, that you've accumulated, but also all your allowances. And so everyone has an allowance. Everyone has a default allowance. And I've already mentioned it once, called a nil rate band, not to get too technical, which is £325,000, okay? So everyone has this default allowance. Now, with good planning and a good will writer or estate planner, really, okay, who knows what they're doing and understands that, this figure, or the clock turns and resets this figure every 7 years. So if you're someone who has a significant amount of wealth, £1 million plus combined as a couple, okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, whatever, it doesn't really matter. You're now understanding how the game works, and a savvy advisor would know how the game works, to utilize this. That's why I say time is your friend as a resource to mitigate and reduce any inheritance tax liabilities using this nil rate band figure. Now, as a married couple, you can inherit each other's nil rate bands. If you are widowed and remarried, you can inherit your widowed spouse's allowance plus the new spouse if they pass away. So you get 2 lots. All right? I'm not saying to kill off your partners if that's what you're thinking, all right? I'm just saying. So that's why I always ask the question. You see, my question is, have you ever been widowed or divorced? Okay, divorce, none and void. Widowed, guess what? You're still deemed as married. It's just that the spouse is no longer alive. Okay? So it's called a transferable. Let me get a fresh. Transferable allowances. All right? And ultimately the nil rate bands. Okay? I apologize for my pen, it's playing up today. So, I'm just checking my notes here. I don't want to go too technical. I just want to give you a smidgen of what's going on so you can start to know what to do. There's another allowance that you all have available to you, not all. It's quite a technical one. I'll just mention it just in case. So if you are a homeowner and you have children, in fact, that's a star next to that, we call direct lineal descendants. What does that mean? Stepchildren, even from a previous relationship, adopted children, foster children. Okay? Grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Yeah? I think it stops there. So it's quite a wide range of what we call direct lineal descendants. You will qualify for an additional £175,000 allowance for tax. So if you're married, I'll start off with the married people first, okay? If you're married, so we've got Winston and Marcia, and you happen to have children or direct lineal descendants who qualify, okay, and you own a home, okay, then you technically have up to £500,000 of allowance for tax, inheritance tax each, which is £1 million combined. Okay? Have I lost anyone yet? Or am I doing all right? Any questions at this point?
Sorry, Richard, I'm a bit lost. I thought you said it was 175,000 for each of the children. Is that right?
So, not for each child. It's per...
Not for each child, no, for 175,000 allowance.
That's correct.
For the children.
So we've got the 325 nil rate band, and it's called a residential nil rate band. I did skip a step a little bit of 175. So you get £500,000 each adult if you qualify for the additional 175,000. And so married couples effectively have £1 million before they're liable for any inheritance tax. Okay? So with that, because it's transferable, so the first person to pass away doesn't necessarily pay any tax at all. Yeah? Because you're married, is transferred to the wife and tax-free. That's another thing. You can make an unlimited amount of gifts to your spouse during your lifetime. There's no 7-year rule you probably heard about, or that 7-year rule. There's none of that between married couples. You can give as much as you like. So that's a good tax planning tool. So if the husband was worth 10 million and didn't have a will, realize that he's sick. And so let me put it this way. I'll tell you a story. I'll be a better example. I have a client. He has a mistress. He's been successful with having a mistress. His younger children, I think the oldest is like 13. All right? apparently the wife who he's happily in a relationship with, they're happy, he lives at home, etc., has no idea that he has a mistress, and there's no idea that he has children with that mistress. So with his main wife, there's 3 children, and then with his, as he calls, second wife, there's 2 children. Okay, there's no will. He's expecting, a lump sum of cash to come in, around about 10 million, and so I'm helping him do the planning. Yeah, so part of that planning is like, well, if you pass away tomorrow without a will, only £270,000 is going to your wife because you don't have a will. You've not told them what you want. And then the rest will be split 50-50 between your surviving children and your surviving spouse. He wasn't happy with that because he wants the mistress to get something. He doesn't want the wife to know he has a mistress, even upon death. Yeah, I can see Yvonne laughing. And he wants all 5 children to benefit. So you can see why he needs a will. So I explained, well, if you have a will, and I'm like, you've put me in a really precarious position because I've got to talk to your spouse without giving away the fact that you have a mistress and other children, okay, data protection, privacy, etc., etc. But ultimately, when you pass, if you pass, for a tax planning tool, if you haven't got, because I told you, it's very difficult to manage a lot of money, at least that 10 million goes to your spouse, and then your spouse can manage the 10 million without tax, because you can give unlimited amount to your spouse, but it has to be planned. So you need a document to do that, called a will. Everyone understand what I'm saying? Any questions at this point? Yeah, he definitely wants his cake and eat it. All right. So the example just kind of reflects about planning, okay? And a will is a trust, okay? It's called a testamentary trust, a trust that takes place upon death. So you see in the Bible, if you read the Bible, New Testament, Old Testament, same thing, okay? It's a testamentary trust. It's a trust that takes place upon death. It only comes alive when someone dies, all right? So you need to establish your will so that, and plus, if a will cannot be found, it doesn't exist. If a will's not signed and signed lawfully, i.e. with 2 witnesses, I feel like I'm going to preach, so I'm going to stop. With 2 witnesses, it's invalid. Okay? So
can I ask a question?
You may, yes.
So if you're not married, you haven't a partner, you're a single parent, can you gift to your child as much money as you want?
Yes, but I'll come on to that. Hold that question because it's a very good question. Yeah. Okay. But if you can hold it and I'll answer it when I come on to non-married
okay, cool.
individuals. So I'm just highlighting the tax perks for married couples, okay? It doesn't mean that you can't have tax perks unmarried, but I need to do more planning because I can't transfer to, if you're unmarried, you're just seen as 2 individuals. And this is the difference. So then we're going to come on to the next, hopefully answer Linda's question, all right? But any questions on this first before I move on?
Yeah, I've got a question. You said if the will is not found, what happens?
It's not valid. There is no will. So you go back to government will territory.
But what if there is a will, but we don't know where it's stored? We find it later on.
If you can't find it, if you find it later on, depends on how later, then maybe things can change.
Okay.
But if it can't be found, then there is no will.
Is there a place people keep wills then?
Yeah.
Is there a place for people to be storing wills and letting people know?
I advise people to store their wills and it would be on a national register so that at least it can be found. It can be traced and found. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Thank you for that.
So, but ultimately, if there is no will, there's no will. If the will's tampered with, it looks like it's been altered, manipulated, it's now null and void. Okay? There's something called probate. You might want to write that down. Okay? Which means to prove in Latin. All right? And part of the probate, which is what the government does, all right, is to prove your estates for tax, obviously. And so if there is a will, is it in good condition? Is it valid? Was it signed correctly? Is it the original copy, not a copy itself? Is it the original will itself? All that is question marks for the probate registry or the probate lawyer, okay? And if there is a will, then you have an executor to administrate the will. If there's no will, you die intestate, you'll get granted an administrator, could be a family member, someone who'd volunteer, administrator, and then you go through the rules of intestacy.
Sorry, can I ask another question about, you said it's got to be on the national register. Doesn't it automatically, when you do a will with a company, get on a national register?
No, it's a service you pay for. It's not automatic.
Oh, you pay for that service?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it's not automatic. Some people just say, "Oh, I'll leave it with my solicitor and trust the solicitors," but some solicitors do go bust. So, it is important to have it stored, in my opinion. So probate, okay. So ultimately, we've covered so far. As a quick recap, what happens without a will? What is that called when you die without a will? How is it distributed via the rules of intestacy? Now we're looking at what happens with a will. We're looking at those who are married first and foremost, because there's tax perks with those who are married, okay? Because I've just mentioned about it being transferable allowances. The different allowances are called the nil rate bands, which is £325,000. You might want to write that down. The residential nil rate band, which is a brand new allowance back in 2017 that was created. And so it's an additional £175,000. Okay, so in total, that's up to £500,000. That's not just for married people. It's any individual who owns a house in the UK, okay, potentially in parts of Europe, but I want to say in the UK, okay, and have children or direct lineal descendant and qualify for the rules. It's quite complicated, but in simplicity, that's basically what it means, okay? So an individual can have up to £500,000 allowance. It's just that for the planning purposes, if you're married, you can pass it on and transfer to the other spouse. If you're not married, i.e. you're single, whether you're in a relationship or not, it's non-transferable. Okay? So if you're single, the allowances are non-transferable. So therefore, the planning is a bit extra, okay? If you're married, then you can transfer allowances, and there's a lot more tax benefits and more time to plan. Okay? So now, let me define something before I answer the question about gifting. I said before that when you make gifts, between spouses is unlimited, okay? So between spouses, okay, the gifting is unlimited. You can give infinite amount of money and there's no time limits, no tax. All right? Outside of that, you make a gift. Can everyone still see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Daryl, are you going to do like a 5-minute break or something at some point, or not?
After you do this part, maybe.
Yeah, because I think it might be due. As it's a very dry subject, so if you're outside of the marriage realm, then let's talk about gifts. Very important, because we get told this either at the pub or at church or some at the park or something is not necessarily accurate. Now, anyone can make a gift. Okay? Excuse my pen. So Marlon can gift to anyone. He can gift to his children. This is Marlon who's single, not married, okay? He can gift to his partner. He can gift to charity. He can do what he wants, all right? So we're going to put charity in the bracket for now. He can give up to £325,000 tax-free, yeah, every 7 years. All right? If he gives more than £325,000 within a 7-year period, then whoever receives the gift, it's Marlon. So let's say he gives to an adult child. What was her name? Kanisha? Anyway, can't remember the name.
Kanisha.
And made a gift of 100 grand. Okay, it's already given over 325. Let's say he's given 350 already. He's already given 350 away. I don't know why my pen is acting up, but I need to get a new one. Sorry about this, guys. So is it fair to say that if he's already given 350, this additional 100,000 will make it 450? Does everyone understand that? Not patronising, just make sure everyone's on the same level. Okay? So Marlon has to survive 7 years of making that gift. If he dies within 7 years, Kanisha pays inheritance tax on that gift. Up to 40%. And it's tapered. Okay? Not going into too much detail, but that's a 7-year rule. So
can you just recap that last little bit? So
Marlon can give anything he wants, okay?
Yeah.
But once he's breached the 325 limit, that's when the tax clock starts, okay? And at that point, so he's given Kanisha, because he's already given more than 325, yeah? It's greater than 325. He's given Kanisha £100,000. He has to survive 7 years. Else, if he dies within 7 years, Kanisha pays tax on that 100K. Okay. Now, it's up to 40%, up to. All right? The longer he survives, the lower the amount. If Marlon was married and passed to his spouse, this doesn't apply. If he's married and passes to his children, it does apply. Anyone else except for a spouse, if he's married, this rule applies. Okay? So, I'm not going to get too technical, but some people may have property portfolios, some people may have businesses, and the rules change again, all right? If anyone wants to know that, let me know, and I'll explain. Otherwise, I'll leave it. Ultimately, we have to understand there's a gifting rule. It's called a potentially exempt transfer, just for being technical. Okay, so you can do your own research. Okay, don't take one thing I say, even to my own students, I don't care who you think is talking to you. Don't take anything at face value. Go and do your own research. Okay, don't listen to me. Go and back it up with your own research, so you can own the information. Not I heard someone say. I hearing someone say is not going to help you. You knowing what is the deal will help you. You go to a broker of a third party, they can give you wrong advice and you're paying them big money. You can challenge them on the advice they're giving you. And I can tell you now, people don't like being challenged. Professionals don't like being challenged. So you challenge them because it's your money. All right? That's just a bit of advice there. So
this 325, is this the same figure that's going to be revised in 2026?
Yes. And we hope it increases.
Yeah.
All right? So it's potential because the person who receives it owns it unless the person dies within a 7-year period. Then tax is due. All right? So I'm just checking. Okay. Everyone can still hear me okay?
Sir.
Everyone can hear me now?
Yep.
I'll reshare my screen. Right. First of all, I hope you're all refreshed, ready to go. We're gonna. How am I doing so far? Has it been enjoyable so far? Just a thumbs up or thumbs down.
Very informative. Very informative.
All right.
Thank you.
Awesome. It's very difficult to teach a I say a dry subject. Keep it not so technical. So thank you for the feedback. So right. One thing I want to go through really quickly is, which I didn't cover technically, but I think you all got the question right, or most of you did. A will is void only when someone gets married. So if you have a will and you're single and you get married, that will becomes invalid. All right? Very important to remember that. Not the other way around. Doesn't become invalid if you get divorced, but it becomes invalid if you get married. So, covered that point. Divorce. Yeah, I could talk all day about this. Right. Now, coming from a Christian background, and I say that word with a quote unquote because, yeah, in fact, don't let me get started. Ultimately, it was always about, oh, well, you know, you enter into a relationship, and everything you enter into with a relationship, it's your spouse's, and you don't. Well, I only can speak for myself. I didn't go into marriage, and I don't think anyone goes into marriage expected to get divorced. However, I'm going to come on to trusts shortly. Divorce is, well, let me do it like this. Marriage, another term for it is known as a nuptial settlement. Another word for settlement is what? A trust. Okay? So, divorce is a severance of that settlement. All right? So the trust is no longer there. It's null and void. The only thing that can pierce the so-called veil of a trust, go behind the trust, in other words, is what? Who wants to guess? You can pierce that veil is divorce. Now, what do I mean by that? If you're coming from, we're talking about generational wealth. This is what the topic is all about. And you're a parent, okay, and you have planned for your family, and you've got a nice nest egg, you got a nice inheritance due for your family. Get my pen working, that'd be really good. To inherit a large sum of money, and you set up a trust for your children to benefit, okay? And some bloke or woman, equal opportunity here, sees the wealth and think, all right, I want to marry this child because they look like their parents look like they're doing okay. All right, they're a predator. All right, known as a threat. Okay, and they want to marry because obviously, you know, with marriage, everything becomes the spouse's once you get married. Now, obviously, with a trust, and we'll go into a bit more detail, certain types of trusts, specifically a discretionary trust, the assets does not belong to the parents anymore. The assets don't belong to the children until the trustees say. So if a child is benefiting from a trust and they're married and benefiting from a trust, and then divorce takes place, then that partner, if they are aware that they're receiving trust funds, can make a claim to benefit, because obviously it's equal benefits now, 50-50, of whatever their spouse is benefiting from, for them to live their life going forward. And there's case law to support this going back many, many years. So I didn't know about this until I started trading as an estate planner. and believed that trust was just watertight, nothing to get behind it. And so I understood the power of marriage and the power of divorce. So then I was always anti-prenups, always. Well, why wouldn't a prenup for? What's the point of a prenup? It's disrespectful. Now I understand. As a parent, would you be happy to know that the hard work you've put in, the hard work you've received, if you received an inheritance from your parents, and if your parents received an inheritance from their parents, so your grandparents and great-grandparents, and you're passing that wealth down to your children, would you be happy to know that half of that wealth, if you only had one child, for example, was gone to a third party? Yes or no? Right. And one of the fears of children getting married is you want them to benefit, you want them to do well, you want them to have enough, but then no one trusts the other side. I don't care how good friends you are. I don't care how much you respect them. It's your hard-earned wealth, and you don't want it to go to the other side. So majority of people don't say, "Oh well, when you pass away, I'm happy for all your wealth to go to your spouse." No, the grandchildren. Yeah, I want it all to go down to the grandchildren. I want it to go in the bloodline. Yeah, because that spouse, and we call it threats to wealth, could remarry, and all that money that come from you is now going to somebody else. And I told you, wealth is never necessarily created or destroyed. It's just transferred. So marriage and divorce could be a tool for wealth transfer. The rich do it all the time. All right? So a prenup is an agreement. It's a lawful agreement that can be set up where you make an agreement, no different to a business plan, no different to making goals, no different to succession planning or risk analysis in a business, to say, well, look, if things don't go well in the future, we can't tell the future. How do we want things to go? How do we want to treat the scenario if things don't go well? Okay, so here's my wealth. Here's my parents' wealth. Here's your wealth. Here's your parents' wealth. It is theirs. It's not mine. We're coming together and we should start from scratch, which I agree with. Now, if we don't do a prenup and things go messy, are you going to be happy that you get half the wealth? Would I be happy? No, blah, blah, blah. And then you come together pre-marriage, prenupped, and agree lawfully and fairly of what the terms of the separation should be if a separation ever takes place. It may never, ever take place. If it's done properly, it should be respectful. If it's done purely on, I don't want you to get my money, then obviously it leaves a bitter taste in your mouth and you'll never really trust the other side. But I think that's the only way to protect generational wealth. Yeah, the other side of it is, as my mum always taught me growing up, Richard, you must learn to see and blind, hear and deaf, and a still tongue keeps a wise head. Children can't be talking about your assets, your wealth to their spouses. Any questions on that before I move on? I don't know if I can. Linda, are you talking or you're muted? I'm not sure.
I'm munching.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Did anyone have any questions? Okay, I'll move on because time's going. All right. So with regards to trust, is Darryl still about? With regards to trust.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. This is how trust works. You have someone who creates a trust called a settlor. You have property that you put in the trust. You have someone who benefits from a trust called a beneficiary. And you have someone who manages a trust called a trustee. All right? So you have a settlor who creates the trust. They must own the assets outright. You have a beneficiary who benefits from the trust, and you have a trustee who manages the trust. All right? They're three separate so-called offices. Technically speaking, the same person can be all three, but they're different offices. Okay? And this basically protects the property because the property now belongs to the trust, not to the individual. If it's not in your name, you can't be taxed. It can't be taken from you. You can't, if you go bankrupt, they can't take it. I've mentioned about divorce already and what happens there. So if they're not aware of it, they can't claim it. Your children can buy houses and not get stamp duty and higher rates of stamp duty and penalised for already owning property because they put their name on their parents' property in the first place. That's not a good move. Don't do it. If you hear about people, I want to put my property on my children on my property to save tax, that's probably one of the worst things you can ever do. You're probably going to create more of a tax liability for your children and more problems for them down the line. Okay, so utilising trust just takes it out of your estate. You remember I mentioned about estate before? It takes it out of your estate and it's into a separate entity called a trust. And if it's not in your estate, then it doesn't belong to you. If it doesn't belong to you, it can't be taxed or taken from you. So the secret to wealth, I started with this, I was now semi-concluded this, is to own nothing. As I said, a trust takes it out of your estate, so you no longer own it. You don't own the asset anymore. The trust does, but you could be a beneficiary or you could be a trustee and manage it, so you still have control over what happens, and the settlor defines their wishes as to what they want to see happening. So the secret to wealth is to own nothing and control everything. By one of the Mr. Rockefeller, I believe it was David or Kevin, claimed that coin, or that coined that phrase, or quoted from them after making, I think, 600 million in a year and not paying a penny of tax. All right? Wealth is not how much you make, but how much you keep. It should be defined as, if it's in a trust, it's protected. So the likelihood of you keeping it is not going to be is much higher. There's something called threats to wealth, which is important for you to recognize, such as other creditors, not necessarily to you, but to your children. If they're spendthrifts and not good with money, or they meet someone who's a predator after their money and they're just generous and don't see it coming. Bankruptcy, talked about, again, not necessarily for you, it could be for you, but also for your children and your children's children's children. If the wealth is in their name directly, it's gone. Creditors, bankruptcy, predatory marriages, I've already mentioned. Divorce, you can lose it, your children can, so protect it. Remarriage, you or your children, if you're remarried, you do and you don't do a new will and something happens to you, it all goes to the spouse. Well, if you do a new will and don't plan properly, it goes to the spouse. If you have no children and you have wealth, it all goes to the spouse, as you know. So is that what you want? Okay? If you believe that your will was valid and it's invalid because you got married again, you could lose a whole lot of stuff. All right? These are threats to wealth, creditors, bankruptcy. I'm talking about even care home, tax in general. Yeah, bankruptcy, as mentioned, predatory marriages, divorce. Now, paying inheritance tax is a threat to wealth. Why is that a problem? So if parent number one, Winston, pays inheritance tax once, and then he has children who received an asset and copied the father and didn't do no will and passed away, inheritance tax is paid on the wealth twice. And then their children don't do any planning because they're following their parents. Do you see where I'm going with this? 3, 4 times. That's a compound tax. They're getting taxed on the same money over and over and over again. It's called generational inheritance tax. You got to stop that. You got to cut it off. Yeah, you got to cut it off. And that only happens through planning. So that's a threat to wealth, generational inheritance tax. Yeah? If we don't start now and we're building up wealth and our children don't know what to do because they're following our example, because there's no custodian to wealth in the family, it's just a vicious cycle. So you're paying tax through interest on debts, you're paying tax while you're alive, VAT and everything else you're paying, and then when you die, you're paying another 40%, and then generationally on top of that, compounded. That's disgusting. Okay, so it's important to why you got a plan, and the key is to utilize trusts to eliminate taxes. Well, that's not really a correct statement. Let me rephrase that statement. It's not tax of it's tax mitigation and tax planning. All right. So you want to be able to have control, and you don't want to be an owner. You want to be broke on paper, but live as a king or queen. Okay, still have controls. That's why, is it Will Smith goes bankrupt, 50 Cent goes bankrupt, Boris Becker goes bankrupt. They're living like kings still. Do you understand? Why? Because they're operating with a trust. They say they can't find, what's the gentleman's name? Black Panther, what's his name again? He sadly passed away a couple of years ago. And they reckon, he didn't have a will. I guarantee he must have had a trust.
Chadwick Boseman,
yeah. I guarantee he would have had a trust. All right? The guy was way too planned to pass away and no one even realized he had a sickness to not plan your succession, yeah? So as far as I'm concerned, Burt Reynolds, all of them, they've got trusts, okay? Now, you can have trust in your lifetime, which is really where the major planning takes place, and you can have a trust that takes place upon death, all right, which are will trusts, just for technicality. I know will is a trust, but you can have trusts that are created upon a death taking place to create generational wealth for your children. And you can also have trust in your lifetime, mainly for asset protection or tax planning, okay? And the use of another vehicle for ownership control, depending on the scenario, and I emphasize depending on the scenario, is the use of corporations, also trusts, as I mentioned, and you can have them onshore and you can have them offshore. That's a whole nother topic, but it's just for completion. All right. Last set of questions, Daryl, if that's okay.
All right. What are the best ways to protect against divorce? We have get a prenup, all of the above. The correct answer is, so my thing's covering my screen and I can't even move it. B and D only. Richard, do you want to explain?
Yes. So, I said keep your mouth shut. So if no one knows, if your spouse is not aware that the family has a trust, they can't claim it in a divorce.
So stop chatting, basically.
Yeah. So, and also, again, a bit technical, but you could have multiple trusts and you could be benefiting out of only one of them, which probably is really, really small if the plan is done correctly. So that's all they can claim from. It won't affect the whole of the family wealth. So that's what I mean by keeping their mouth shut. And the prenuptial is I've already explained. So,
this one came earlier on. In some cases, the will is read after the person is buried and half the planning and instructions not carried out. How can this be avoided?
In this country?
I'm assuming it's this country.
I'm not sure. I mean, it should be when someone passes away is one thing. There's no kind of formal reading of a will per se. It's just for the executors to get on with it and do what they're supposed to do. What was the question specifically? Sorry, just
was that you, Yvonne, that said the one? Do you want to clarify?
Yeah, I know it's happened in my family. We've read the will after, for some reason, after the person's passed, and they didn't actually stipulate, I wanted to be buried here. I wanted to be cremated.
Okay.
It's not just, I've heard a couple of people said, we've read the will, it's not what she wanted here and abroad.
In fact, it's a really important point with burial. I advise people to actually have a separate burial plan because it can, again, cause confusion as to, no, he wants this or no, she wants that. And then family split on just the decision-making for the burial. Or they find older versions of wills with two different decisions on there. So to do a formal burial plan itself, just to write a document stating how you want to be buried and what you want to see, what music you like, stuff like that would be very, very beneficial.
Saying that, my nephew made a will in November, and unfortunately passed in February.
Oh no.
And thank God he had a will with everything stipulated. He was a very astute young man.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Excellent. No, it's important actually. So yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Anyone
I had one.
Go on.
It was more about what happens in terms of the control of stuff. So if you got, say, for example, a trust, but you decided you want to do something to the property, I don't know, extend it or something, because it's in a trust, does that mean you can't do something like that, whatever it happened to be? Or once it's in a trust, it has to be left in the state that it's in? I wasn't quite sure what that meant once you put it into a...
No, so basically, that's a good question. So remember I said the trustees are the managers of the trust. So they'll have a responsibility. So let's say it's a property that's put into trust, then they have a stipulation and responsibility to make sure that the upkeep of the property is maintained, else it's going to obviously lose value or it'll be a distress to the beneficiaries. And the primary responsibility to the trustees are to the beneficiaries. So obviously they've got to find the funds, etc., but ultimately they would be responsible, because it's no difference like paying insurance, paying the bills. It's the trustees that do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So basically,
if it's a living trust,
it doesn't matter. Any trust. I mean, not a will per se, but if the trust is created from a will, or it's a lifetime trust, it's the same thing.
Okay, perfect.
Are there ongoing costs for managing a trust, or is it just one fee you pay and that's it?
Depends on what the trust is doing, and ultimately the cost is depending on who you make the trustees. If there's a charge for their time, for like some kind of legal advice, or some kind of administration. So, for example, accounting is important. To check the valuations, any minutes need to be updated, any spending on the trust behalf needs to be, an accounting needs to be done, and that's someone's time effectively. So if it's a lay trustee, obviously they may not charge for their time, but if it's a professional trustee doing it, then they will charge for their time. If the settler's alive, they can pay it. If not, the trust would have to pay that.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's another one, which I see you, Sierra. I'm going to come to you in a second. So you mentioned earlier about getting a will. If you've got a will when you're single and then you get married, that will is now void.
Mm.
What do you say to someone that says, because obviously I know that there's things you can do when you get married afterwards, that says, I'm going to wait until I'm married before I get my will, just because I don't want to waste my money doing it now if I'm going to get married, and then it's going to be void anyway.
Yeah. You can do it depending on the time scale, but if you're with that person, you're going to get married to them, you can stipulate the name of that person in the will. So it's a marriage contemplation of marriage clause. So therefore then the will won't be null and void, because you've already stipulated who the future person that you're going to marry is, and then the will be planned accordingly as well around that person. So yeah.
Perfect. Sierra, I'm going to come to you in a second, because there's one in the chat box. I'm going to say this one, so if anyone does need to leave, they can. So someone asks here, how and where can you have your will done? So you can see that there's quite a lot to the estate planning. It's not just, here's a will, here's a trust, and that's it. Let me go to Marks and Sparks and get my will done, or get a free will done. You're going to get what you pay for at the end of the day, and someone ends up paying for it in some way, shape, or form. You don't get it done properly, then someone's going to end up paying after you've gone. And I've got a client now, funny enough, who's telling me, this was probably about a month ago, that her mum, who passed away about 10 years ago, their house is still in probate, because when her mum was sick, her best friend was looking after her and convinced the mum to change the will so the daughter would be disinherited from it. So it's still in. So the best friend literally talked the mummy to change in the will to put her on it. So for 10 years, this house is sitting there and in probate. Yeah. So the whole estate planning, you can see there's quite a lot to it, especially if you want to do it properly, effectively, and we're doing generational wealth. So one of the things that Richards does, he does estate planning for people. Obviously, that's not a free. You can have a free consultation with Richard. Is it 30 minutes initially, Richard?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll let you talk about it in more detail in a second. Actually, it's probably best that you do it. But I trust Richard. I wouldn't bring Richard to you guys if I didn't trust him. Do you understand what I mean? He's doing my dad's estate planning. Do you know what I mean? Because that's how much I trust him. I don't bring people to people if I don't even trust him with myself and my family. Does that make sense? Right? So, who was third place?
Yes, my question was, if you have life insurance, can you put that in a trust?
Yeah, it's imperative really, because it adds to your estate. So if you got large policies, it doesn't really matter. Okay, I say it doesn't really matter. I've got a client, for example, spoke to the parents last week. Sorry, I think the estate in total with crypto life insurance is about £900,000. The life insurance itself is only 50,000. And it's on a decreasing term for the next 5 years. So in that case, there's no inheritance tax for them to pay anyway because they're married. It's under £1 million, and putting that 50k into trust and he might survive 5 years, and it's a waste of money. So I wouldn't advise that. As opposed to someone who has life insurance, let's say it's over the £325,000. Depending on the age as well, because if you know you're going to be buying a house in the future, et cetera, and just in general, put that into trust. It now comes out of your estate. So if anything happens, then there's no tax on that. And the other side of it is probate. Funny enough, if you've got a mortgage on your property, the law changed about maybe 5 years ago. If you've got a mortgage on your property, and someone passes away and the mortgage is still on there, and it's not a joint property, then probate won't not be granted until the mortgage is actually paid off or property sold, and life insurance won't be paid unless a probate has been granted if it's not in trust. So people are in a very sticky situation where they've either got to sell the property to pay. And then the inheritance tax clock, if there is any inheritance tax, starts from the day of death. And there's 6 months before interest starts to accrue. So if you got a large bill, under client inherited over like 1.4 million, there was inheritance tax about 400 grand to pay, inherited 4 properties, but there's no cash. So they were property rich, but cash wasn't enough. So they couldn't, because they didn't own the property, even though they inherited it, the probate had been granted, so the name wasn't transferred into their name, so they couldn't realize the cash. So the only way to do it was to sell one of the properties to the estate to get the cash to pay the tax man for the probate to be granted. So if the life insurance is in trust, it's just a death certificate required, and they'll pay out. And then the mortgage can be cleared, and they don't have to sell the property to pay off the mortgage. So there's lots of dynamics to it, but ultimately, yes, it should go in trust.
Perfect. Anything else? Any other questions? If you have, feel free, just ask. There are no dumb questions. There are no stupid questions.
Yeah, I have a question. If somebody gets married at the last moment, maybe to somebody who's older, maybe to somebody who's got, mental health issues, or just, I don't know, somebody just didn't, the family just didn't know nothing about this person at the last moment, can that be challenged in terms of where stuff goes? Because I'm assuming it would go to the spouse at some point, isn't it? But
the marriage
kind of challenging them getting involved.
Is there a will in place or not?
With this particular situation, I think there was, but it was kind of contested because it turned out there were like 2, and people didn't know which one to go off. And then this person was claiming to be like common law, even though this person was actually just kind of helping that person before they died. So that's kind of what happened.
Okay, this is where mental capacity comes in. In fact, you need less capacity to get married than you do to draft a valid will. That's why there's predatory marriages with elderly people. The capacity to say yes, I do, is considered far, far less than the capacity required to say, well, I want this person to get X and that person to get Y. So it's very difficult to challenge a predatory marriage, for starters, because of what's capacity for marriage. It's very hard to challenge that. So that's the first thing I'd say. In terms of the validity of it, if it was only done recently, that would be looked into. If there's more than one will, it'd be go by dates, in date order. So the latest one is the most valid one, and the other one will be rendered void. If they claim it to be common law, then technically they shouldn't be getting anything unless there's like property involved and they were living in it more than 2 years and that kind of stuff. Then they could potentially make a claim on the estate on that basis, from what I'm aware of. But there'd be more a probate situation.
Sorry, and you were saying with regards to the will, it would be the one that was the latest. However, what if the wills are split between countries?
If the will's drafted correctly, it would state, the UK will say only applicable to assets in the UK. And then if there is a will in another country, then it only pertains to the assets in that other country, not the UK.
Right.
So it takes it outside of the estate of it, basically.
So if the will's made in the UK, but the estate in another country, the will would not apply.
It depends on how the will's drafted. If the will's drafted in this country and the estate's in another country, then the definition is that if you're, and it gets technical down to domicile and residency and all that kind of stuff, but all things being fair and equal, assuming that they are domiciled and resident here, then any assets around the world will be deemed as UK, unless the will stipulated otherwise. Yeah. So if it's assets abroad and the will's drafted here, because I've got a client who's got land in Jamaica, but they don't want the hassle of having to go to deal with solicitors in Jamaica. They're happy for it to be dealt with over here, whoever the executor is.
I understand, Richard. You've been doing this for how many years have you been studying? You said you've been working in financial services. How many years now?
It'd be about 23 years. 23
years, and then specifically in estate planning.
Specifically, estate planning is come up to 4 years. It's 2019. 3.5 years now. Trusts has been 13 years. Specifically,
13 years.
Yeah.
So you got to imagine taking 13 years of, even more than that, 13 years of working in trust, 20 odd years working in finance, and trying to wrap that into 2 hours. There's a lot more that Richard can give, but that you kind of got to do that on a one-to-one.